Welcome to Bloomberg Law. I'm Lee Pacchia. Tort reform, mandatory arbitration, judicial campaign contributions, caps on damages, not exactly topics you expect to see covered on HBO, but those are exactly the topics explored in the documentary Hot Coffee, which examines issues facing the United States civil justice system. Attorney turned filmmaker Susan Saladoff joins us now to discuss her film. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in. You've said that this movie clears up misperceptions about our civil justice system. What are those perceptions, and what is the truth?
Well, most people think that the system's broken. And the reason why I named the film Hot Coffee after the infamous and completely misunderstood McDonald's coffee case is because people think that we have too many frivolous lawsuits. Greedy trial lawyers, lawsuit lottery. These were all market-tested terms that were literally wordsmithed and focus grouped and then repeated over and over again through a massive public relations campaign to convince the public that our court system is out of control, that it needs to be reformed, which most people think is a good thing until it affects you personally. And then people would be willing to either vote away their rights in elections, sign away their rights in contracts. And people don't even know they're doing it. And what happens is that when people are injured and they try to access the courts, get into the court system, they realize that it's not there for them anymore. And when you cannot access the court system, those who benefit are those who are not held accountable. So large corporations like BP that's dumping billions of gallons of oil into our streams, or companies that make baby formula that kills babies or harms them, those companies are not held accountable. Or the tobacco industry, which was really one of the early corporations that started this because they made a product that killed people. So if we actually held them accountable in the court system, they may not make very much money.
Let's talk about the first character in the film. It refers to the Hot Coffee case, the McDonald's case that's kind of become this iconic public meme. How did this case become known as the first and foremost frivolous lawsuit in the public's mind?
Well, you have to know about what's going on politically at the time that this verdict was rendered. So the verdict came out in August of 1994. Bill Clinton was president, and in November, the Congress flipped Republican. And Newt Gingrich became the first Republican Speaker of the House in 40 years. And he had his contract with America. And in it was legal reform or tort reform. And when this verdict was rendered, or when it came out, the political machine sort of grasped the misperceptions that were being fed to the American public by the media. I mean, on the night of the verdict, Jane Pauley was sitting in for Tom Brokaw on the NBC Nightly News, and she reported to the American public that this woman spilled coffee while driving, which is completely false.
Right.
And so those misperceptions and also sort of the sensationalized versions of the story, those got repeated and repeated. And then the political machine sort of grasped onto those, continued the distortions of the facts, and made that the poster child for what's wrong with our civil justice system.
And I think it also picks up on a latent dislike for what lawyers do in society. I mean, that just seems to be something that a subcurrent to the whole film seems to be there is something there that people just don't like lawyers.
You know, until you need one.
Right, exactly.
You know, then when anyone's injured or has a problem, the first person they'll go to is a lawyer. So, you know, lawyers are demonized also in this public relations campaign. I mean, let's remember that there was millions of dollars spent in a massive public relations campaign by large corporations to convince the public that lawyers are not good. You know, I mean, as you know, it goes back to Shakespeare.
Right, absolutely. Tell us about caps on damages. What are they? Why are they so misunderstood? Why are they so important to talking about the civil justice system in the country?
So one of the sort of the leading ways that corporate America decided to limit our access to the court system is to put limits on what people can get when they are seriously injured and take a case to court. It was attempted in the federal legislation back in 1995 when Newt Gingrich was Speaker of the House, but it failed. Well, actually, it passed both the Senate and the House, but Bill Clinton vetoed it.
Right.
And so then the tort reform advocates decided, well, we're going to go state by state. And they've been very effective. And so what happens is that legislators who never see the person who's injured, never hear the facts of the case, never really understand the seriousness of whatever is happening in the courtroom, they decide that there's a one-size-fits-all limit on what people can get in these kinds of cases. So as you know, in the case of Colin Gorley, who has severe physical and mental disabilities as a result of a pretty blatant malpractice in the court system, their family went to trial. They got a $5.6 million verdict, but because of a total cap in Nebraska that caps not only medical bills, wage loss, and pain and suffering, this child was limited at the time to $1.25 million, which, of course, by the time you take out the medical bills and the costs of the trial and the attorney's fees,
it was totally inadequate.
Doesn't come out to very much, and he has to live his entire life with that limited amount of money. So what happens? The taxpayers have to pick up on it, because the amount of money that it's going to cost, which was what the verdict was, $5.6 million was what the jury determined was going to be the cost of his medical care for the rest of his life. Now, because the wrongdoer, who was found liable, found negligent, doesn't have to pay, and the insurance company doesn't have to pay. So we as taxpayers have to pick up on that. We have to pay the difference. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that.
Tell us about judicial campaign contributions. That topic figured heavily into your work. Why are they important?
So John Grisham actually wrote a book called The Appeal, which fictionalizes one of the storylines that's in the film, which is how our state Supreme Courts, not just our state, but mostly in our film we concentrate on it, how they're being bought and paid for by large corporate interests at this point. In many states now we elect our judges. When you elect judges, that means they have to run for office.
Right.
And when they run for office, they have to get campaign contributions, which totally causes a potential conflict of interest. Because now that judge who's on the bench is beholden to potentially those large donors. Karl Rove came up with this really brilliant idea it started in Texas, to essentially find candidates who would be more business friendly and promote those candidates, find money to fund their campaigns, and essentially use front groups like Citizens for a Strong Ohio or Citizens for a Safer Community. They sound like they're citizens groups, when of course they have no citizens in them. They're essentially created out of whole cloth from public relations campaigns, from public relations firms. And then money is funneled into those organizations, and then television commercials are put out. Massive television commercials, usually attacking the judge who they want to get off the bench, who might be not as pro-corporate as they'd like, maybe more pro-consumer, and put in their own judges.
Right. Now, the story that you highlight in the film of the election that was heavily influenced by these interests was pre-Citizens United, correct?
Yes.
So,
Citizens United was just January of 2010.
Right. How has this changed the picture?
Oh, it makes it even worse. So the Citizens United case, as many of your viewers may know, essentially gives corporations unlimited ability to fund elections without people necessarily knowing who's behind the funding. And so, we, as average citizens, we can't give unlimited amounts of money to a candidate. We have limits. Right. There are campaign limits. But corporations don't have those same limits when they use these front groups. And so it's a really, it's a major problem of how much money they have. But we as consumers, we as the victims or consumers, we don't have the same kind of resources to combat the amount of money that's on the corporate side. And so our elections are being skewed. And we are getting judges in place now who have a bias, who have, an interest in continuing to stay in office. And that's not the way the system is supposed to work. And we only have 3 branches of government. It's our legislative branch, our executive, and our judiciary. And people forget that, the courts, they're supposed to be a checks and balance system. And, we already know that money influences legislative and executive branches, but is money supposed to influence our justice system? Where's the one place that we as average citizens should be able to have a fair shake? It's in our courts. And if we can't access the courts, if we can't get into the courts, or when we're there, there's this bias against us, that's not the way the system should work. And I'm trying to at least let people know about that so we could take our rights back.
Right. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce also made a surprise cameo in the film. Tell us about them and their role in the tort reform movement.
So most people think that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a government agency. I mean, it makes sense, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
And it's very official sounding.
And, and also, like, small chambers at the local level, I mean, they're, those are, they help small businesses and so on. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is not one of those at all. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is the largest lobbying group for corporations in the world. Mm-hmm. And they now have been, for the last, 10 or 15 years, have been funneling money into these judicial campaigns. And as you saw in the film, Tom Donahue, who was the CEO of the U.S. Chamber, admitted, I don't remember exactly the year, it was like in the last few years, they'll put $19 million into these judicial races all over the country.
It's an enormous amount of money.
Enormous amount of money. And who has the money on the other side to combat that?
Right.
And they are doing that to support their membership, which are large corporations.
Mm-hmm. Karl Rove also has a role in the tort reform movement. Tell us about his involvement.
Well, Karl Rove realized back in the 80s that this was the one issue that could sort of galvanize corporations from all over the country. That even, like, if George Bush is running for governor in Texas and he makes tort reform one of his primary issues, then he could get money from all over the country, not just from Texas, because if you limit people's ability to go to the courthouse, you're giving all corporations the ability to make more money. So it became this, the focus, actually, of President Bush's governor's campaign. And then when he ran for the White House, he brought it right up to the White House. And it became, as you saw in the film, one of the primary issues that he continued to advocate for in every State of the Union address.
One criticism of your film has been that it's one-sided to a certain extent. How would you respond to that?
I tell people all the time, look, I clearly have a point of view. I practiced law for 25 years. I lived these cases, not these specific individual ones that are in the film, but the topics. For 25 years, everybody's heard the other side. People come into the film already biased against the average person who brings a lawsuit. People are embarrassed to bring lawsuits, So I say to people all the time, look, I'm not trying to change your mind. I just want to open your mind that there's another point of view. And I was a lawyer. When you're a lawyer and you try a case, there are two sides of the issue. So if I'm going to ask you to render a verdict, at least render a verdict knowing both sides.
Susan, thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's Susan Saladoff. She is the director of the film Hot Coffee, which will debut tonight on HBO, Monday, June 27th at 9 p.m. And we'll have additional air dates in the coming weeks. Check your listings. If you'd like to learn more about the topics we've just discussed, please log on to BloombergLaw.com and also the Bloomberg Terminal. I'm Pacchia. Thanks for watching.